Computer. So I was looking at your photo with the floor, with the marble
Oh
floor.
yeah, yeah, yeah.
So, and I think, yeah, that was it. I mean, Fernando had a good point about it being an environmental photo because he's in his barber shop, and this is the barber. And this is like his enclosure, almost like his little cocoon.
His kingdom, I think, would be the right word.
Kingdom is good, yes.
That's how he kind of holds presence there.
So that's part of his. That's like an extension of him,
Yeah.
you know. So, and I saw the website. Checked out the website, and you can see a much younger version of it. Not a much younger, but a younger version of him. He's got
Mhm.
maybe it's a brother or something like that. I don't know. But I thought that, man, if you took a shot straight down at one of those tiles and made that as the background
Yeah.
of the website, I thought that would be cool. Then people would go, wow, oh yeah, when they enter the store.
Well, and it is interesting because like when I showed that to you and Jan last week, I mean, that floor is intense. There's just no question about it.
Yeah.
And the time of day I was shooting was towards, I guess it's about like, let's say, early evening. So and that storefront is on the east side of a street, so the light was just streaming in, but it was soft but very bright still. And so the whole floor, like it, like you would be dizzy walking on it because it's just got so much detail. But the neighborhood I was shooting in it, and about 10 minutes later, I took the picture of the folks on the fire truck. So it was the same walk, but it's a kind of Italian Portuguese neighborhood in Vancouver called Commercial Drive. It's just a wonderful place to do street photography, and just there's just so many interesting places there. But he I've walked by that place before because it's just like the whole place just has this really cool vibe to it. There's another place across the way that I've taken lots of pictures of called Calabria, where it's this coffee shop, and it's a deli. They do paninis and such. They've been there for like 30, 40 years, but the owner is just a real character, and like the place is filled with Italian statuary and like all of these decorations everywhere. So, and marble everywhere, Roman statues, knights in armors, full stuffed horse. It's a eclectic place. So it's just a lot of fun to take shots in a place like that.
I would imagine that Vancouver probably has a website or something about the history of Vancouver where people post photos
Mhm.
of that and so forth. That
Mhm.
I think that would be an interesting thing to peruse, and something like what you just shot, you could post that up there. I think.
Yeah, I mean, I posted to the Vancouver Flickr sites and such, but I'll make a point of getting his portrait and the firefighters' portraits to them. I think I know which fire station that their truck was from. But yeah, I mean, as I say, it's just kind of really fun to walk through there. But it is interesting, like when you do those kinds of environmental shots. Like the other thing about that one, like it's busy, like it's really really busy. And that's just kind of part and parcel of it. And I think of some of the ones that is it Stitch does a lot of environmental portraits.
Yeah.
And one of the things I just love about so many of his shots is just seeing the context of the workspace with all of the untidiness, the busyness, the clutter. And sometimes it's like a professional workstation, other times it's retail, other times it's food related. And there's just that it's that surrounding atmosphere that just kind of adds so much interest to it also.
Yeah, I think
I like
Stitch, yeah,
that.
his shots too. I mean, like Jan was trying to do with his theme of motion and
Mhm.
fast and stuff like that. Like, I think he's got that going. I mean, you could take a lot of his photos shows waiters, waitresses handing stuff to people.
Yeah,
I think he could have a really good series of people offering you something. I think
yeah,
there's
that
something
interaction.
about that, yeah, that could add a mystery to it,
Yeah, yeah,
or a
absolutely.
charm to it anyway. So anyway, what was going on? Uh, Ski put a question, posted a thing about. I'm gonna go ahead and put it here on. I'm gonna share this. View, share. Every time I do this, I lose track of the. I guess I just need to be more in the habit of it. Here we go. About AI.
All right, yeah.
And can you see my screen with the?
Yeah, I looked in at that discussion.
Yeah, and with this. Now, personally, and I said this in a message I sent to him too, that I think the biggest problem I have with this as just supplying something like this as your own work is the artwork is actually the work.
Hmm.
It's somebody else's artwork. It's OPA. And there is the term transformative. You can use artwork in a transformative way so that it's more than what the art is.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't think this is transformative enough. No, I see the point of having a person's face in there, generally adding more interest to this photo, but it's still mostly people's art. But anyway, that's not where I'm wanting to go with this. That's just as a caveat. I've got more issue with the OPA. But I think what his idea, though, about adding an AI person in the window is fascinating, and especially the series of questions he came up with that, where he had, where am I here? Let's go back. Okay, so then when he showed the AI version to a few people and they loved it until they told him the guy was fictional. Once they found out he was AI, disappointment kicked in, and every single one of them switched their preference to the unaltered version. So, which I easily can imagine that. I mean, sometimes I wonder, my photography club, I'll start telling them about how I've done images and things like that. And sometimes they'll tell me, "Well, you just should have shut up about that," even though I wasn't using AI, because they thought it was this, like particularly when you edit out uh, distracting objects.
Yeah.
Um, but anyway, here he's got these questions, and here the first one is using AI okay as long as no one knows it's there?
Oh, these are wonderful questions, and I had an experience yesterday that with a different, well, a different shot, and I had another one last week, one where all of these questions are kind of rumbling around in my head. But just to give an example, so I'm just going to back up, like this idea of just adding a person into a shot with the mural. I don't think that's very transformative. It might add an additional point of interest. And I do understand maybe why some people might be disappointed in that, one of the things, like we have this kind of concept of great catch. You had the eyes to see something and grab it while it was there. And so the presence of someone in that window is more interesting than no one at that window.
Right.
Now, the idea that that's making it his is a little bit problematic because Gen AI is not his, right? And it's drawing in probably that guy probably was in someone else's image, potentially in terms of how some of the generation works. I bought a new lens or a new to me lens yesterday, and I was out shooting with it, and it's a crazy wide, like a 9 mm lens.
Oh,
So I was doing for part of the day, I was doing street photography with a 9 mm lens, which is an odd thing to do. And I'm getting to the point of this in a second. So with one of the shots that I was looking at in the evening, a gentleman who's kind of off towards the edge of a 9 mm shot that I'm pretty close, is crazily distorted. Like his body is fine, but you can see that he's a little bit chubbier than maybe he is in real
right.
life. But his one foot, which is kind of pushed out a little bit from his body, he's got like an absolute clown shoe on. His one foot is like, 3 times longer than his other foot. And it's the optical distortion. So, the first kind of fun bit here is that this idea that what the camera captures is life is false. And it's just this amp, and I think someone made the point in here about the mechanical capturing of images through cameras is not a reproduction or a true reproduction of the world. It is a representation of the world. So this guy had a clown shoe. And so I thought to myself, well, I could leave it because it's kind of fun, but I decided to use Gen AI to remove it and replace it. And so after a couple goes, because sometimes you have to do that, it ended up replacing it with a kind of proper shoe. It kind of looks more like the distortion is not quite so noticeable, but it was the wrong color shoe. So he's wearing a white shoe on one foot and a black shoe on the other. I'm leaving it like that because it reminds me of what, I tucked in a bit of Gen AI there to do this correction. And, I'm not gonna maybe tell people about it. But I know it's there, and I've done it, and the picture is no more true than it was before I introduced the AI, because the picture itself had all kinds of optical distortions, and the optical distortions were rendering it in a way that is not true to life. So, again, you get into a bit of a rabbit hole here when you start talking about this in terms of, what is AI doing? How is it altering the image? And is it okay if no one knows it's there? Maybe, though. I have another image I was working on where I haven't found a satisfactory way to make the edits I would want to do, which includes some cleanup with AI or actually a generative piece. But I can see it. So if I can see it, I'm gonna have to address that before I do more with that image. But I'm not putting my stuff forward for, let's say a juried competition with a group of judges, where there's rules and obligations. This is just my pictures. I can
Yeah,
do
some
that.
places they'll even want us know they want to see the raw file too.
Yeah.
So that would be more of a photojournalism type of thing, though.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not what I think photojournalism is fine, but that's not where I go. And if for
Yeah.
some reason I were to actually take a newsworthy photos, I mean somebody jumped up and shot the president or something like that, and I got on, hey man, I'm going to share it. I'm not going to edit it or anything, just because
Yeah.
then I would finally have a newsworthy photo. But that's not likely to happen.
Yeah. So I think it's fair game to do it if it makes the image you want it to be, right? And I have no obligation to present the world in a way other people want, unless I do, because I'm kind of doing it for the sake of documentary representation. I'm doing it as part, I'm doing it within whatever constraints of the community I'm sharing. If I'm doing it for myself, I can turn it upside down, I can invert it, I can do whatever the heck I want, and it's fine.
Yeah, I would
Even
say that if using AI, if you use AI and nobody finds out, and you don't tell them, like, what's the big difference? I mean, I've seen one thing I think about when you have, I think what is some company, Skylum or somebody where they have sky replacement. I would be worried about somebody saying that's exactly the same sky that was in this other photograph by somebody else,
well,
and then so I think that's a problem. But if it's something that's unique that would not be replicated in someone else's photo, and you
yeah.
don't tell people that, I think that's okay unless you just have, you feel guilty about it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I've seen a couple, at least a couple, maybe more images where there's this beautiful full moon rising over the North Shore Mountains in Vancouver. Beautiful, absolutely stunning. Impossible to happen in the real world. Because the ecliptic and the path of the moon is east and south, not north. So someone uses, kind of replacing sky or placing, an object like the moon in the sky. They've done something quite different, and if they're sensible about it and kind of thinking about the context, it could well be an improvement. It just becomes something very else in terms of the shot itself. And I think especially when people are doing treatments to the sky for the sake of drama or light, they often don't follow through with, like, the sky is very determining of the light in an image more often than not. And you sometimes see a mismatch between like a overly dramatic sky that someone has done a bunch of work on, and then the scene, it doesn't line up in terms of let's say the hardness of the shadows with what's going
Right.
on in the sky or some other thing like that. So it's like when people do changes, but they don't pay attention to the shadows. And suddenly the light on the subject is totally wrong because the person is backlit, but they're suddenly illuminated with fill flat or something, like as if it's natural light from the front, but that's not the case.
Yeah, many
So
times you will even get a bad feeling about the photo because something just doesn't look right.
yeah, something is kind of uncanny, but it's not Gen AI uncanny valley. It's some
Yeah,
sloppy editing on the part of a human.
but I think the key here is as long as no one knows it's there. So I would say knock yourself out.
Yeah.
But okay,
Yeah,
now
so I spent a considerable amount of time earlier this week playing around with an image because I wanted to fill in a certain section because I something was out of the frame that I wish had been in the frame, and I thought, oh, it's just a tiny little thing, so let's put it in the frame. And then in doing that, the grain of the generated fill is totally wrong with the rest of the image. And so then, okay, so now I'm creating a 50% gray mask, and I'm adding Gaussian, I'm adding noise with the Gaussian
Mhm.
pattern, and then I'm trying to blend. At some point you just go out and take the picture again.
Yeah. Well, I think also I like to tell people too, how much work are you willing to put into that
Yeah,
image? Is it really worth it, or should you actually spend more time on something that's more worthwhile?
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And if
And I
if you're
think
not
you've made the
careful, yeah, you'll be spending more time on those things than you do on the stuff that's really going to count.
Yeah, and I think you've made the point before that, like sometimes people are doing all kinds of stuff trying to make an image sharper when they just get a sharper image and
Yeah.
start there.
So, and also you point too about the wide angle lens. That's not a real depiction of, even though it was what came in through the lens. And I think lens distortions are valid as a real photograph. And that's where I go in. I'm kind of anal about what's a real photograph and what's not.
Yeah,
So I'd say, yeah, that's a real photograph, but that it definitely is not how it would really work in front of the human eye. Just like I've also said that about macro photography. If you were actually that small and was that close, it wouldn't look anything like that.
yeah, and I'd say a considerable number of things that we photograph are not at all true to what the eye sees. I mean,
Yeah.
some people really work to reproduce it. They might shoot with a 43 millimeter or 50 normal to kind of keep it within what the human eye sees. But a lot of stuff that then happens in terms of aperture in particular and the dynamic range, they're an approximation of what we see. They are not what we see.
Yeah, with portraiture, you generally want to have a more flattering, longer lens, like
Yeah,
135 millimeter plus. So you're talking about manipulating it so it's less, and where you had a wide angle wouldn't be so flattering; it'd be more cartoonish. So
yeah,
we're really there's kind of all over the place what can be arrived at through using a camera and a lens. But that's where my world is what happens with the camera and lens.
yeah.
And I think that's where the heart of it is. And but I'll go into that later. But I think your point about using the pointing out that the wide angle lens wasn't a real depiction of reality is a good one, and it's something to think about. The other part, the next one is how much AI is too much, and I would say that would be related to the first one. As long as nobody knows it's there, I mean, if people know it's there, that's too much
Well, and
for
I think
sure.
we need to very rapidly get to a finer level of distinction or discernment in terms of what we mean by how much AI is too much. So starting what kind of some kind of weird bird flying by. Um, Starting with the capturing of the image itself. A lot of cameras now, if you're shooting with an iPhone or something, for instance, there's already an application of AI that's creating the image that might be
Yes.
taken. And so, if I take a darker image with that, it might have actually taken 10, 20, 30 images, and it's used an algorithm to kind of bring them together to merge them into one on the basis of some notion of sharpness. The focus could be driven by an AI algorithm as well within the camera, and again, an exposure is also being driven by some algorithmic set of parameters. So even in the capturing of the image with a modern camera, you're already kind of in a AI zone. You bring it into post-processing, just importing it into Lightroom, which is what I use, or Photoshop. You are now subject to another series of potential AI interventions. The minute you do any kind of adjustments, including noise reduction or anything like that, those are AI-driven algorithms that are determining a lot of the choices that are made to adjust the exposure or the image. So all of that is AI. Is that too much? And I haven't even gotten to the point where I might have added or removed an element from an image with a generative AI tool.
Well, I mean, I think it was Ansel Adams. I'm not 100% sure was him that said this, but it's like the negative is the print is a performance of the negative.
Yeah,
So, and one thing, and that's with Adams, and everything was absolutely deliberate, and there was no other process there looking over your shoulder, making these decisions for you. Where, as much as I enjoy the iPhone, I think it's spectacular that it can actually do a lot of the stuff that it does. It's actually where photographers don't have to worry about the exposure anymore. And these people aren't really photographers, they're just capturing moments in time, which is perfectly fine. That's a good thing to do, but you're not really being a photographer. So the camera's doing the thinking for you.
Mhm.
And that's, to me, then I kind of worry about that for myself. I would rather be doing the thinking, my own
We're on a
thinking.
slippery slope here. You realize that?
Yes. Although, sure, I'll take pictures. I do a lot of journaling with my stuff, and I'll get a perfectly fine photo, and it works out great. I'm happy with that. I'm not have a problem with that. But I'm not likely going to post that up as something I would be proud of. Although I did come up with that, I shot out of a plane window a few weeks
Yeah, that
ago.
was nice.
That turned out pretty well.
Yeah.
But it's hard to say, how much came from what the iPhone software did to get that image.
Well, and for quite a while, I mean, like one of the critiques that people were bringing forward with those kinds of images was just that the software and the programming was standing in place of the optics because of the size of the optics in order to try to produce something that physically couldn't be produced. So, that's not as much of an image as maybe out of a camera where the optic and the representation or capturing of it on whatever it is you're imaging with is more true. But I think it's just a really interesting thing right now. I mean, for a lot of these questions, I think the only realistic answer is it depends. And it depends on your intention, it depends on context, it depends on audience. And I think it ultimately depends on what you are representing your image to be, including your own, including of something that is a moment in time or something that's a modification for some artistic or aesthetic purposes. Again, those things all kind of change what you're doing here. I do notice that with increasing, like even in the past year, I've seen an increasing level of comments coming with some of the weekly feedback where people are saying, well, you could take that piece of trash out of the background, you could have done, you could have taken that pole out of this image, all of these things. And I think it's totally reasonable for people to say, no, I can't, because I want to leave it in. I don't like doing that to my pictures. But then there are other times when, yeah, the picture might be better if that was done, but there's really no definite answer to that. And it's
Yeah.
legit for someone to say, this is what the camera shot, and I do this level of adjustments to it, but I don't go beyond that. Or I go through and I was at a concert earlier this week taking some shots of this really incredible band, and there's this damn microphone stand that got moved right in front of the key musician. And so there I am trying to get rid of that microphone stand through generative remove, and there's times I just gave up on that because it's just too much hassle. And especially if a object is going near a person's face, your chances of getting a good remove for the tool is very bad. And I've described this before, where in one case I was just trying to move a microphone stand, and someone that Adobe, that's who it was, substituted basically a rock guitarist into this jazz band, and I kind of looked at it for a minute. Well, that's kind of hilarious.
Yeah.
I just kind of backed off from there. So yeah, all of these things are now part of playing with images.
Yeah, I've seen it. If you tried to replace a lamppost, and it's a different style of lamppost.
Yeah.
Or like the mic stand, you could have, that was started out as an electro voice microphone. Now this is a Shure microphone.
Yeah.
But well, I think when it comes back to like with a phone cameras, they have lenses that are the size of a dime.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think there's ever any way there's going to be the quality arriving at through a phone that you would get with a camera with a full-size lens. I think that the software and algorithms that come up with pretty darn good images through the phone, that's admirable. And there's nothing wrong with that, because these people that really aren't photographers are able to get these decent images.
Mm-hmm.
But I still think that the cutting edge of the best quality photography is going to be with using a camera. And now we're talking about AI, so it could be AI is like
Yeah.
manufacturing this stuff without any cameras at all, or there's no lenses involved.
There's a colleague of mine here in Vancouver a few years ago, and I can't remember what the device was, but he had this interesting device. It was a phone, or sorry, it was a camera shaped like in the form factor of a phone. It had maybe about 15 lenses on it.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so an array of lenses of different focal lengths
Mhm.
arranged in a way that allowed it to become a compound lens. And what was so interesting about it, like it was kind of, it was pretty much a half-baked idea. And the technology and the kind of processing hasn't kind of caught up with what that could actually lead to. But what probably will happen, it's already happening on iPhones in more limit or modern phones in more limited ways, is multiple lenses. So we don't need to be stuck with one. And there are some professional astrophotography instruments that are one of the cool ones is called, I think it's called Dragonfly. It was developed out of, I think, a university in Ontario, and they took these amazing, like these really expensive, beautiful Canon 200 millimeter lenses, let's say. I might be off on the focal length. They constructed them into kind of an array with like 12 of them all set up. They put CCDs sensors on all of them and started imaging. And then they used the computers behind the scenes to composite all of that data and create an image. And they're able to see things that telescopes have never seen in terms of really, really faint and highly dispersed light structures that are within certain kinds of deep sky objects. And it's a whole other world that opens up because of that technology. So I would expect that we're going to see increasing use of compound lenses, multiple lenses, arrays of lenses in relation to the technology. And it again, it's not really about one optic seeing something truer than the other. The optic itself, even if it's just one piece of glass, is changing what is imaged. It can't actually fully represent the world as it is. So, I think this is just going to keep on going, and it'll be really fascinating to see what that means. Like even, the tricks where you have, the kind of thing you saw in the Matrix where you can rotate around a shot in
Yeah.
time. It's actually not too hard to build one of those arrays just with consumer grade materials. And then suddenly you have, all of these different kinds of ways of imaging the world coming forward, where you can move around it, or you can change the aperture depth of field on the fly. You don't have to do it at the time you capture the image. You can already do that in with various products.
Yeah, I've read about the astrophotography thing too, and that's very fascinating. But you can sort of double up your megapixels, just for lack of a better word, with each new lens. You have more information to deal with. And the camera you were talking about with the multiple lenses, that was a big deal back 10, 15 years ago or 10 years ago. And I can't remember the name of the brand, but it was supposed to be you could focus after the fact. So
Oh,
you
well,
could,
that's Lytro. That's different.
like, that's it. That's what I'm talking about.
Yeah. So Lytro, yeah, I played around with one once. Yeah, you could kind of quite dramatically change the depth of field after the go. No, this one it was goofy looking. It had 15, 16 lenses of different apertures, or sorry, different focal lengths. And then it would allow you to um, exert some control on which of the lenses and how many of the lenses might image in order to create an image. So rather than having to, let's say, use a digital zoom and interpolate how the image comes together through, which introduces a lot of distortion, you could shoot basically with a 28 and a 70 at the same time, and then it would figure out how to use those optics in order to composite an image.
Yeah, if you're going to that is a very interesting concept. And I think that could be something like that could surpass a single really nice lens. And I think the Lytro, yeah, there was an interesting story. I've read a lot about that because it was kind of a big deal for a while. People were really interested in it, but something went wrong with the investments and so forth, and we didn't have good support, and the whole thing just died.
Yeah, it was pretty again, I think it was just an early example of something that could happen. but the implementation wasn't very well done. So it had lots of problems. So in any case, yeah. So that Dragonfly, I'll put up a better link than the one I just did.
Oh yeah,
That's the
that's it.
University of Toronto.
There it is.
They've made some fascinating discoveries with things that bigger scopes, more capable scopes can't see, but this sees differently, which is reassuring.
Oh yeah.
But just imagine having 48 of these. These are like really expensive lenses. I can't remember what the lens is. It's a Canon lens.
Am I showing it on the screen?
Yeah,
Okay, good.
that'd be a real challenge to carry around. You'd need a
Yeah.
tripod. Well,
But
in this
back where
case, pardon?
back where we're getting back to talking about the AI stuff, how much is when is AI too much? Because we've only got an hour but for us here. Now, where did I lose my?
I think you just have to close the one tab there. I can still see the other tab on your.
Where are we headed? Yes. Here we go. Now, how much AI is too much? And I would say it's depending on the photographer. If nobody notices, nobody's going to know unless they figure out, oh, this is fake. If nobody thinks it's fake, you're going to be okay. But how much of your image how much of your artwork is going to rely on AI? I mean, you could have somebody, a 12-year-old, using voice prompts to come up with an image,
Yeah.
a beautiful image, and with almost no work at all. He just figured this out how to do it on a weekend. I mean, what's going on with that? Is that a real work of art compared to the work that somebody actually puts into trying to craft that art and with the inspiration that's required with it?
Well,
I mean,
I gave the example a couple of weeks ago. Like I had read Walter Benjamin essay where, photography when it first came out was seen as a debasing of the artistry of painting.
yeah,
And part of that was, you have an artist who will sit down and over the course of hours or a week, reproduce a subject in a portrait. And then you have this kind of, photographer who, maybe just kind of comes along and takes a snap and, they're done. And how can that possibly compare to the artistry of all the time it takes to do this by hand and with all of the skills involved, So again, I don't think the argument lands on whether or not it's a creative endeavor. It is creative. It's just a different set of tools. But I can also understand why I guess I would make a distinction in terms. I think that there's a different kind of creative process involved in going out with a camera, going out with a sketchbook, going out with a paint and brush, and trying to produce something. And all of them are creative, differently so. And it's okay if that's the case, and they partake of different media in order to do their work. But it becomes a bit of a mugs game, I think, to always play the game of like I was happy with the definition the community kind of came to about something that actually is an interact like light hitting a sensitive medium. So it's something involving light is here as opposed to something that's never seen the light. So that's fine in terms of saying what a photograph is, but it doesn't say anything about what's creative.
yeah. Well, I mean, I think digital painting is a whole other story.
Yeah.
That's where I draw the line with photography. But there is definitely a gray area between the two. But something that's just totally arrived at through text prompts to get an image, that's not photography. If that doesn't mean it's not a valid art form, but it's not photography,
Yeah.
in my opinion. And
So
I think you could also say this just as valid. You could say a painting is photography. I think you got to draw the line somewhere with some of those things.
yeah. My own like I don't think I have any hard rules that I follow, but like I had an experience recently where like I sometimes am using now like I was kind of reluctant to do a lot of generative stuff and I still am, but I'll sometimes like let's say there's just a little bit that I didn't manage to frame within the image and I've made the decision I'm going to broaden the canvas and do that. I'll sometimes do that. Recently I had done that with an image and it worked and you couldn't really tell that that little strip had been added through a generative step. I went back and shot the location again and I got it framed properly that time. And so I then swapped out for the new image that I shot in preference to the one that I had manipulated through Gen AI. So, in my case, I could go back to the location. It was convenient enough to do. I was motivated to do it because I thought it was a really cool image, and I value it slightly differently because all of what I've got in the image is from one exposure, as opposed to one exposure and then Gen AI adding in these sections that I didn't manage to get. I mean, I'm happiest with what I'm producing if the decisions I've made for most of what I see are the ones I've made when I took the exposure with the camera.
Yeah. Well, I like to think of it as what was the spirit of the photograph, of the scene you're trying to capture, as opposed to saying, I'm going to start with this photograph, but now we're going to make it look more like it's a carnival by
Yeah.
putting these colored lights in it, or you're going to have unicorns running through it or something like that. Because I think that's a whole other ball game. And if
Yeah.
somebody does that, that's totally artistic, equally valid, but you're departing from photography to a
Yeah.
certain degree. Maybe it started out as a photograph. Like I'm sure you know the term rotoscoping.
Yep.
And there was a Ralph Bakshi as the director. He did animations, and he did a Lord of the Rings. Was all rotoscoping, where they had film and then they painted over the film, rotoscoping. And that's fine what he did, but that's not exactly the same thing as the typical cinematography the cinematographers use. So, and they freely say, "Oh yeah, well this is rotoscoping, not a problem with that because that's what we're doing." But I don't understand why people have to insist that something is a photograph when it is so far from the original photograph. It's not funny. But again, that's just my opinion about it. My joy is using a camera and a lens and a scene and light and stuff like that to arrive at stuff on a light sensitive surface that then I can then try to perform.
Yep.
And
Yeah,
other people, maybe not so much.
well, and again, I think that it's I think that it is about what one enjoys ultimately. And some people, they are very much kind of keyed into photography being a snapshot of a moment, and the value of just having captured something is pretty much all that's needed. And putting that forward as remembrance of a moment is I think one of the wonderful things that is kind of the starting point for a lot of people's pathway into photography. Then you start, I think you can start kind of cranking it up from an aesthetic standpoint where you're trying to capture a certain kind of emotion, a certain feel. You might want to punch it up in terms of colors. You might want to pull the colors out. Like any number of possibilities are there, and people get interested and hooked and kind of move through different styles of photography, just as anyone does with any kind of creative work. But I love it when people feel that it is a creative work as well as maybe something that is documentary or just something they enjoy doing for whatever reason. So I guess I think that there's a lot of moral panic around the presence of these technologies that really change what we kind of then see to be a photograph. And the fact that they're fake for any number of these reasons is kind of disruptive to the notion of a person taking a picture and it's their vision, it's their eye, it's the scene in front of them. But that's not such an unusual thing for a new medium to push against an old one and create a lot of consternation.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the word value. Like what's the value of the photograph? And where I might tell somebody, says, if you could clone out that light lamp behind you, the value of this photo would increase. Where somebody else would, and I did this wonderful photograph of a young man playing pool, had these bright lights behind his head. If he only cloned that out, that value of that image would be so much better. But he told me it was important for him to have it as a document of the actual scene.
Yep.
So, and what I would like to try to tell people, especially people who look like they might be just starting out with photography, try to clone this stuff out. Try to make sure that horizon's level or all these other things to give them advice. And that's not always, if somebody's determined to do something different, I mean, that's their prerogative. But I think most of the time, people are receptive to things that can make their photographs better, add more value to it.
Yeah. And I guess, it's like we've talked before. I mean, the notion of value is subjective. The
Yeah.
notion of what looks better is subjective. The notion of how much color you should punch in is subjective, and there's room for that in kind of the latitude of approaches. And I'm ashamed to admit it now. There was a period of time when I was saying, "Wow, this HDR stuff is really
Yeah.
cool."
You and everybody
Look,
else.
yeah, look, I can give myself 36 stops of light, and
Yeah.
the fact that the images look surreal was in fact part of the charm until it was more part of the gimmick, but there were steps along the way where it motivated me to play and try and experiment. And those are all good things.
Yeah. And I lost my track. That does, yeah, you said something else that got me thinking about that. But I think, benchmarking is where I try to come down with giving advice to people about a photograph. Because if you look at photos that are part of a list of what are considered to be good or great photos, like a great landscapes, and you're shooting a landscape. I mean, I think it's helpful to stack yourself up against what other landscape photographers are doing, or birders, or anything else.
Yep.
And if you don't want to, if you want to go against that grain, I'm reluctant to. I don't want to say, oh no, you should make your photographs like everybody else's. But if you're trying to get forward in your own photography as art or as a craft, pay attention to those benchmarks.
Yeah, I know, I totally agree with that. And I think, to get really good at what you might be trying to get good at, if you have reference to, kind of quality or people who have really been thinking about it in terms of, use the example of a landscape, reference to more of, what is called a landscape will help you to get better at your craft, but it might also help you to get better at what you are trying to create, which is maybe different from a standard landscape. So reference to that standard, reference to something that's landscape is a perfect place where a lot of really good artistic people decide to make their first attack to kind of break that
Yeah.
convention and do something with it. But they're doing it from a place where they've got reference to it. So yeah, I can make something look real, but isn't it more interesting to do this?
Yeah,
Uh,
it's definitely good to experiment.
yeah. I'm having. I mentioned to you, I was out shooting with the new lens yesterday, and it was a really fun experience. And I think the thing that was the most fun about it. It's always fun to shoot with a different lens that you've not shot with before. In my experience, I always enjoy that. And then there's a con in astronomy. There's this notion of first light. You take a telescope or an eyepiece out under, or a mount out under first light under the sky, and you see what does it reveal of the universe to you. And that same kind of thing can come up with, like, I think, a new lens where, in this case, a 9 mm lens shows you an absurdly wide view
Yeah.
of the world.
That's usually
100
called a rich field. Back in my astronomer days.
Yeah, yeah, and I love Richfield astronomy. You get these huge skies. So with 9 mm, it's 135 degrees
Yeah.
of angle, and without quite, like, I've shot with 15 mm and 21 mm lenses, so I know the challenges and some of the pitfalls about shooting with lenses like that, because the minute you're at all off level or skewed a little bit, weird things start to happen in front of you. So you can start off in the day, and you can kind of be attending to that to make sure you're orthogonal and lined up carefully with the things you're doing. And at a certain point, for me at least, I hit a moment where I go, well, what's the fun in that? And start kind of doing sharp angles up, and well, obviously I need to get the ceiling in here along with the wall, or I need to kind of sway off to the right, and then suddenly the world just kind of starts to do kind of an inception thing where all the angles and stuff start to kind of get a little bit distorted and playful and splayed out and such. And I'm finding it just a hoot. And there are some images where I'm trying to correct it. Like I was just playing last night, so I'm trying to correct the geometry, and I'm using probably some AI in that to do that. And then there are at least a couple times when Lightroom just gives up. It just has no idea what to do with this, and it just kind of smears the whole thing. And then I'm finding that my eye for what I was trying to do with the lens, which includes the distortion, is the better image. And so I'm going to spend, some time playing with this because it's a lot of fun. It's getting me to look at things differently. It's producing images that I find that I like, and it might be this HDR moment for me again. I'm sure anyone who has any discipline with a tilt shift lens will roll their eyes with this kind of stuff. But as I say, I mean, I find it's really wonderful because it's just a different way of creatively seeing. And I even managed to get a B picture, and this thing will focus to about 12 centimeters to infinity. So you get these kind of freakishly, deep things with all kinds of the kinds of distortions that happen when you're too close with a wide angle optic. But it's really interesting visually for me, even though within the one frame you get your central part that's kind of rectilinearly correct, and then it kind of gets a little bit less so as it moves out towards the edges.
Yeah, well, also with astrophotography, like the photography club, we have every now and then have field trips to go out to take pictures at night, and I usually can't stay much past 11 o'clock, so I'm not really quite able to do that. But they got some gorgeous images today, and many of them were disappointed because there were clouds. There was some cloud cover with the
Yeah.
Milky Way. They were getting the Milky Way trying to get a reflection on a lake, but the cloud cover was gorgeous, and you could
Yeah.
still clearly see the Milky Way through there. I mean, that was like a very atmospheric photo. I mean, it was like, wow, that was so cool, as opposed to just, oh, yet another picture of the Milky Way.
Yeah. No, I think it's, again, I think that there in any of these kinds of approaches where you're trying to image things, there are people who are trying to do a certain thing, and it's very frustrating when that doesn't work for them. And a lot of stuff can be kind of all kind of predicated upon getting perfect images. Then there's I like, the nice thing about Milky Way shots is that it's a lot more accessible for people to shoot those. You can shoot
Yeah,
those with a regular camera. You don't need really specialized equipment to do it. And then at the same time, it kind of like it drove me mad trying to get down to the precision of tracking that you needed to actually do any kind of deep sky stuff. So
yeah,
I didn't find it pulled me at all into it. But it's, I like the stuff where people like show the Milky Way in a context, in a place. Some people hate it though when they do it like with a really wide angle, because then you get, the distortion. You don't get as true a shape to the Milky Way. You get more of an arc,
right.
which is an optic distortion.
So now we're getting, you've only got about 12 minutes left. We got a whole bunch of questions, but maybe we can continue this next week too. Okay, so how much AI is too much? Okay, let's go. Does it depend on the genre or purpose of the image? Which I would say, sure. I mean, wildlife and birders, I think they would be up in arms with AI was used almost at all.
Yeah, while they're shooting with their AI-driven focus systems.
Yeah, I think that would be a place where that works for sure. But that's not, yeah, because I don't know autofocus. I mean, that's technically you call that AI. Although I have a very specific definition of AI. I don't think that AI has actually arrived yet.
And then maybe again, I think we don't have the right nuance here. There's a difference between artificial intelligence in terms of an algorithmic system that's being applied to reality from generative AI, which is then doing something in the, like in terms of creating images, creating, stuff in response to prompts, etc. They're all kind of running on models, language or algorithmic models. And in some cases, they're hooked to a focus, a motor in terms of
Yeah,
helping to determine focus. But it's still AI, or it's still an algorithmic system that's making choices faster than a human can.
yeah. I always feel the term AI is a marketing term more than anything else.
Yeah.
But they got the marketing people got tired of using smartphone technology, you know. But because I think when AI really happens, people are going to be very surprised. It's going to be much more than that. But that's just a philosophical, my own opinion kind of thing. But the point here is like how does it depend on the genre or purpose of the image? Where absolutely right, yeah, autofocus, especially if you can look for the eyes of a bird, for example. That's very helpful, but still, it's not adding anything to the image. It's actually capturing the image. Um, but if you were going to actually add an extra bird in there or something like that,
Yeah.
or I'm going to put this limb, here's a gorgeous tree limb and it's framed nicely with the clouds. So now I'm going to have AI plug a bird, even though maybe they took the bird from another one of their images. I don't think the birder people would like that very much.
Yeah. Well, let's push it farther. You have the bird flying against a nice full moon, It just
Yeah,
like the it gets it you can take it as far as you want. And I think, the question here is around, what's appropriate. I think doing light modifications around exposure and sharpness and things like that is probably not offensive, but as you said earlier, there are lots of different kinds of contexts where you need to actually give the negative, the raw, and if it's been manipulated past that, you're not going to pass muster.
right. And next one is, does the type of AI use matter? Background tweaks are fine, but altering the main subject crosses a line. I think we've already discussed some of that.
Yeah.
Like altering the main subject. Because like you said, you've extended borders before. I do that a lot. Usually my macro photographer, I've got photography, there's a pretty much all our bokeh stuff. It's just a blurry background. So you're really not doing it, but extending that blurry background,
Hmm.
as opposed to adding more windows in a skyscraper or something like that. So I think we've already talked to that part. What do you think?
Well, yeah, I mean, again, I think, it really does come back to your choices. And I think that, like, I guess there are times when I find that if I'm working too hard on an image, I should just go out and shoot it again. And there are times when that's just not a possibility. So that might mean I'll kind of dig in and work on something. Um, it also depends on the kind of style that you're bringing. Like, it may be the case that, I use the microphone example, that it's worthwhile to pull a microphone off of an image because it's a stronger image without it. But there are other times when there's really nothing wrong with the image as it was. So sometimes we can go, I think, quite far to kind of pull stuff out of images. And, I'll often leave things in because they're fine. So you kind of set the level for that yourself. But I do think it's absolutely unnecessary for people to go and, let's say, clean a whole bunch of stuff in the background of an image unless there's a real big distraction it causes. I have found, and this is kind of interesting, I don't know if you ever get yourself stuck with, sometimes if you're trying to set your the dynamic range in the image where you actually have information and you've got highlights that just won't go away,
Mhm.
and so you have
Yeah.
to keep going down and down and down, and the picture is getting duller and everything. I found in a couple of cases now that's actually not a bad time to apply a generative replace, because it will actually often work quite well and get rid of that highlight, so you don't have to kind of take a bunch of steps to deal with that.
Yeah, I think that's valid. I think that's also goes back up to the as long as no one knows it's there. Like who's going to prove you wrong? I mean, it's not that big of a deal for one thing,
Yep.
as opposed to the entire sky. Like if your whole sky is blown and you replace it with a different sky, eh. But if you just got that one bright spot that you just want to tone down a little bit.
Yeah. Well, as I say, there are times when there's nothing you can do from a point of exposure to take the heat off of a blown highlight, other than turning it gray.
Yes.
So that's where just a little flip with the generative
So you're
brush.
talking about actually adding some little cloud texture there or something like that.
Well,
Something.
so for instance, it's happened a couple times where it's just, a texture along the surface and there's a couple hot spots, and it will just clone the texture from that surface.
Yeah, and you can also do things too. And I've done this before, where you can take another section of the same photograph, the sky, and just take the other image and then paste it
Yeah.
where you want it to be. Flip it on, make it a lower level a layer, and
Yeah.
then slightly erase the area above on that top lever,
Feathering.
so that pulls out that, and you can very subtly introduce that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
No,
yeah, the AI stuff will work fine too.
yeah, and we didn't talk about it. I don't see it in the questions from Ski, but the other thing that's like absolutely remarkable and so powerful now with a lot of the AI built into some of these tools is the masking. Like I think back in the day, the time it would take to try to do a mask, and at
Yeah.
some point you just kind of give up, if someone's hair or something. But masking is now much, much, much easier.
Oh, it's getting
And
better. Yeah,
and you
absolutely.
can get far more subtle and into kind of detailed, complicated spaces with a variety of tools or with gradients and other kinds of things. As to, if you want to go farther, it's just remarkable. And again, to me, I'm far more game to muck about with the nature of the light or the exposure within an image using a range of these tools. But I don't see that quite the same as dropping in a unicorn, to use your example.
Yeah, and I think yeah, it depends. Yeah, what you want to do. You're not really altering the scene. You're just using a mask, and masks can be used for many reasons.
Yeah.
And that's
But you can dramatically alter the light and the relationship of the light in different components of an image. So it can be quite radical too.
yeah. Okay, so does it? Okay, here's the AI with photographing other people's art to make the image feel more your own. I would say that if you're going to rely on you're already introducing somebody else's artwork. So okay, so I need to make this more like me. Let's make AI be me. I think that's like, why would you bother? Don't you have anything better to do with your time than that?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think that that's necessarily the result, but art has long been driven by people doing kind of ironic or kind of representations of another work of art and kind of adding subtly a change to it. That's a long tradition, kind of that referencing. So people reference other kinds of art all the time. Banksy is a perfect
Oh yeah,
example. And so I've seen so many interesting creative AI generated creations that are referencing and playing and kind of broadening ways in which we see images that we're very familiar with and locating them in things that are very unfamiliar, very, kind of a dislocation. To me, that is artistic and interesting. To use Gen AI just to perhaps change the cropping to maybe change some of the colors or maybe add different elements in there, maybe a bit less so, but I'm sure someone can push that so it is more creative. But I don't think this is maybe the perfect example of that, in that just adding a person in there, like there was an image that you and I both commented on involving graffiti some months ago. And I think you went after a bit in terms of OPA, in terms of the same question about transformative thing. And I looked at it and I think I was okay with it. But the thing for me was I could see that the person had waited until the subject was walking under the image where there's a faucet of water coming down. And through the timing and the framing, they interposed a walking subject against that image. And to me, that was a contribution. And we see that, we see lots of people give those kinds of fishing trips where you find a cool thing out on the street and you wait for someone to walk into it.
yeah,
So I think that kind of thing it's a genre of photography. It's a long tradition of people doing that kind of thing. And that is a contribution, whereas just dropping a person onto the scene through Gen AI, I don't think that's quite as much your work. You had the idea it will look better with the person there, fine. But I can see why people would be disappointed. Oh, well, it wasn't as much of a good catch by you. Whereas when I see some of the good catches we had even in last week, Jan's photo was very much like that. Arn's photo was very much like that. You go, wow, really well timed, right? They captured that. Whereas this isn't a capture.
yeah. I'm very well. I talk a lot about OPA, uh, and I think if you're going to include a lot of somebody else's art in there, it must be really darn good, something interesting. for that to work, not some little bitsy thing. I mean, I've included some artwork, other people's artwork in my photos before. And I do take a lot of photos of other people's art, museums and things like that, because I just want, well, partly because I want to make my oldest son jealous when I'm there. But then I'd like to just be able to study the pictures myself more. It's just fun to do.
Yeah.
But I think if you're going to rely on somebody else's art as part of your own work on a regular basis, I think you could probably do better. I mean, if that's your whole thing, I guess it's one thing, but if you're working through photography, I don't think that's the best path.
Yeah, I agree. Hey, can I show you a quick image? I've been yammering on with this 9mm, and I just want to show you one shot that I kind of
share. Make sure if you got a.
Yeah, you have to give me permission.
Yep, here comes. Come on, where'd it go? Okay, there we go. Multiple participants. You should be able to share it now. If I can get my share, there we go.
Can you see that?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So there's an example where, I've got converging lines, I've got diverging lines, I've got all kinds of things going on here. And I've taken pictures of this space. This is a Vancouver Convention Center. But I like what's going on here. And I could try to, if I figured out what I wanted to make true, I could try to correct it. But any correction I do of the geometry is it might make it better, but I'm just enjoying playing in the space where there's maybe not quite as strong a orthogonal world.
Yeah, and if I were shooting this, I would cover all my bases. I would get all the lines parallel on one side to all the other lines so I would end up with like 20 different images just to be able to cherry pick the ones I like. Yeah. But I like this image. I like looking right up at Antarctica.
Well, and as I say, I mean, right now, I'm still kind of maybe in a bit of a honeymoon with this, where it doesn't actually really matter if it's a good image or not yet. What it is doing, and I'll show you one other one because it's kind of goofy. Can you see that?
Yep, I can see that.
Like, look at the boot. Look at the boot on the one side in comparison to the other.
Oh yeah.
So, what I'm appreciating about this, and I might temper this over time, it takes very little work at all for the world to have this kind of weird surreal quality to it. So I'm game to figure out what does street photography with a 9mm lens look like.
Oh yeah, it's going to take some work. That's one thing about a wide lens like that. That really takes some work to keep the sensor parallel to the plane you're trying to shoot, and tilting up and down. That's all. It's all over the place.
Yeah, and the thing about it is, as I say, there's probably I'll get better at doing the first thing, which is having it centered properly. But I think I will probably spend as much time playing off center, because I find that playing off center is kind of creatively interesting. But as I say, it might just be creatively interesting to me.
Well, you'll learn from it, at the very least. Yeah. And I think you can read some about how the best we use to weight. Sometimes getting down lower gives you a little bit more flexibility, more stuff to work with, as opposed to just at height.
And you can get really close and have this absurd depth of field, which is kind of fun. So it's you're basically, everything is sharp between about 2 meters and infinity, and you can be like this far away from something with that kind of depth of field.
Yeah, I've got a 14mm wide angle macro, a low one. Yeah. And that thing it's a lot of fun, but it takes a lot of work. You can get so close to it, it'll touch the lens, still be in focus. Yeah. But then you got the shadow of the camera all the time to deal with.
Yeah.
That's really fussy to try to work with.
So I have to head off, but it was a nice chat about AI and a few other things.
Yes, and we can maybe talk about that more. I'm going to reply to Ski's message. I thought his questions are really good ones. Yeah. So I'll let you go. I'm just going to sign off here myself, and I'll post the video later.
All right. Enjoy the rest of the weekend.
Thanks. We'll see you. Bye.